Okay, everybody, welcome. Hope you're safe. Hope you're doing well throughout these odd times that we're living through. Bad enough going through the coronavirus. We now have to have riots and looting going on simultaneously. I look out the window of my office and I see Ladyface Mountain, and it's almost like I'm waiting for Godzilla and King Kong to come rolling down the mountain. It's like anything else that could go going strange in our society. God should protect all of you, watch over all of us, watch over all of our communities, calm our nation, heal our nation, bring our nation together under law and justice, and care for one another, and hopefully restore health to all of the world as well. I'm going to talk today about a particular story in the Torah that's as odd as it gets. It comes from the book of Hosea, the prophet Hosea. And the reason I bring up this particular story, for starters, it was in the Haftorah just a week ago, Haftorah that we read on the Shabbat, but also because it touches upon the theme that we have been talking about for an entire year now, the story of the focus on the chosen people. And we've been in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses' final speech to the Jewish people. And we'll continue in the book of Deuteronomy in text form. Perhaps next week we'll start going through chapters and chapters of the book of Deuteronomy of this speech of Moshe. So starting next week, we're going to go back into text. We'll have part of the screen text in front of you, so you'll be able to study verses together. And every once in a while, we'll stop and have our discussions as we've been doing. But our theme has been the chosen people. That has been our theme. That's been our focus. And we've been talking all the details as to why the God needed a chosen people and why us, and what does it mean to be chosen and why it isn't arrogant. We've been talking about every single angle of this. But at the same time, you can ask this question of, throughout history, how have we done as a chosen people? Have we always lived up to the ideals that God puts before us as a chosen people? And if not, does God ever fire us? You hire someone to do a particular job and you hire someone for a particular mission. What if they don't live up to it? What if they simply don't do the job? Does he fire us? Can he make a decision to choose someone else? And we've discussed this as well from various different angles. Today, I want to discuss it from this particular story from the book of Hosea. So the book of Hosea is about a prophet that lived in Israel. He lived in the 8th century BCE. And the Talmud tells us a lot about him as well that we'll focus on. He was considered one of the greatest prophets of his generation. His career, so to say, if you can call it a career as a prophet, spanned 6 decades, which was a very long period of time for one to be in leadership. By the time Hosea arrives on the scene, the Jewish people had already been split into 2 kingdoms. Now, you are familiar, even just by name alone, you've heard of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Maybe you don't know the background story of it, but you've heard that phrase, the lost tribes of Israel. How do we have lost tribes? Well, under the era when Joshua enters into the land of Israel, and then under the leadership of Samuel the prophet, and ultimately the leadership of King Saul and King David and King Solomon, Israel is one nation. It's one people, one country. Like we have in the United States divided into different states, Israel is divided into quote unquote different tribes. So not states, but tribes. Every tribe has a piece of the land of Israel, with the exception of the tribe of Levi, who were the priests. But there were still 12 tribes because the tribe of Manasseh, or the tribe of Joseph, got 2 of these tribal portions, Manasseh and Ephraim. So a total of 12. These 12 function as one nation, similar again to the United States, made up of 50 states, but it's one country. 12 tribes making up one country. At some point, though, however, after the era of King Solomon, there is a civil war. They break into war. And there's a fight between the northern part of the country and the rest of the country. And they ultimately, sadly and tragically divide into two countries. They were called the Kingdom of Judah, which was based around Jerusalem in southern Israel. That kingdom consisted of two tribes, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. And then there was the north. The north was called the 10 tribes of Israel, and that was called Israel, the kingdom of Israel. So Judah and Israel, two countries now. Sadly and tragically, nothing good comes from this. Hosea is the only prophet on record that we know that served in the north. Most of the prophets, or all of the prophets other than Hosea that you are familiar with, served as part of the kingdom of Judah. But Hosea's story, he's from the north. He was from the tribe of Reuven, and that's where he lived. And although the area in which the northern part of Israel, for most of its history, was saturated with idolatry, believe it or not, sadly and tragically, it was a sinful kingdom. It was a corrupt kingdom. They had fallen under the influence of their more powerful neighbors, which was primarily the Assyrian Empire. And they grew distant from Judaism. And they became rather unstable and very susceptible to outside geopolitical currents. Now, you know, the end of that story is that they were destroyed. Sancherib, part of the Assyrian nation, attacks, and the kingdom of Israel is wiped out. This is 150 years before the destruction of the first temple, 150 years before the destruction of the kingdom of Judah. At that point, Sancherib wipes out the northern kingdom, and he sends all of the 10 tribes of Israel into exile. But he scatters them throughout the entire world. And their history is the mystery of the lost tribes of Israel. Where did they go? Where were they scattered to? Did they retain any Jewish identity? Were they just completely assimilated into the rest of the world? Did they go to Asia? Did they go to Japan? Did they go to China? You can read so many different theories as to where they were scattered to. But most of Jewish history from that point forward takes place from the kingdom of Judah. So the story that I'm going to tell you, the story of the prophet Hosea, takes place before the destruction of the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom, as I mentioned, is corrupt. They're bowing to idols, they're serving idols, they're sinful to one another. And Hosea now becomes the spiritual leader to attempt to try to inspire them to change their ways. Obviously, with the warnings that if not, there's going to be destruction, that this can't continue this way. And so he has this mission to inspire the people to change their immoral ways and to return to God. With this, the book of Hosea opens. And there is this message from God to Hosea. Now, we would expect, as the audience, with the background that we have of what is going on, for the speech from God to Hosea to be, go to the people, speak to the people, inspire the people, tell them it's not too late, warn the people. Any of such talks in the books of the prophets is the normal conversations that God would have with one of the prophets, and what the prophet would then pass on to the Jewish people. But Hosea doesn't start that way. The book of Hosea is quite different, and it sounds more like a very strange Hollywood movie rather than the Holy Bible. I'll read to you, you don't have it in front of you, but that's okay. I'll just read to you a few verses from the opening of the book of Hosea. And obviously you're going to have a lot of questions, but we're going to try to answer these questions as we go forward today. At the beginning of the Lord's speaking to Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go, take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry, for the land goes astray from following the Lord. His instruction to Hosea was that he needs to go and get married, but it has to be to a harlot. He has to find a harlot and marry her. Rather strange. And he went and he married a woman who was an infamous prostitute. He found the most famous prostitute in town. Her name was Gomer. And he marries Gomer the prostitute. He gets married to her. And she conceived and bore him a son. She gets pregnant after their marriage, and she gives birth to a son. The Lord comes to Hosea, and the Lord God himself will name Hosea's children. And he tells Hosea to name him Israel. Not Israel, the English word that we know as the English translation of the word Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael. Israel also is a Hebrew word, which means to scatter seed in the field. The scattering of seed was the word Israel in Hebrew. Why should you name your son Israel? Not for connected to the word Yisrael, God says, but because I will terminate the kingdom of the house of Israel and I will scatter them around the world. So Hosea is told to name his firstborn son the prophecy that God is saying what will happen to the 10 tribes, to the kingdom of the north, that they will be scattered around the world, and thus that name Israel, which means to scatter, is what he should name his child. The verse continues. And she conceived again. She got pregnant again. And she gave birth to a daughter this time. And God says to Hosea, name your daughter Lo Ruchama. Name her Lo Ruchama. What does that mean? It means the one who is not loved. For I will not continue to grant clemency to the house of Israel. So once again, we see in the naming of these children that God is giving prophecy as to what will happen. No love. First child, scattered. Second child, Lo Ruchama. There is no love there. The verse continues, the chapter continues. And she weaned Lo Ruchama, and she conceived and bore a son. She gets pregnant again, and the third child is a son. And again, God comes to the prophet. Same reason to name the child. And each naming is a prophecy. What should the name of this third child be? Lo Ami, not my nation. You begin to understand what God is saying? Scattered amongst the people, don't love you anymore, and now you're not my nation. For you are not my people, and I will not be yours. So clearly, God is delivering to Hosea some very powerful prophecy here. This will be the first exile of any part. It means once Moses brings the Jewish people into the land of Israel, we haven't had an exile yet until God is now telling Hosea what will happen to the kingdom of the north, to what is called the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Yisrael, that they will be scattered amongst the nations, that they will not be loved, and they'll not be his people. So the summation of this first chapter of Hosea, as I said, one of the most strangest, complex chapters, most confusing chapters in all of the Bible. God comes to his holy man, his prophet, and he tells this prophet to marry a woman who was known for her immoral ways, and she gives birth to 3 children. First one, remember the name, Israel, to be scattered. Second one, Lo Ruchaman, she's not loved. The third, Lo Ami, not my nation. Now, why would God tell a prophet to behave in such a way? Why not? If you want a prophecy, give him the prophecy, let him deliver the prophecy. Why does he have to marry this woman, have the children, and in the naming of the children, we get these strange, difficult prophecies? It gets even worse. If you were to examine the words of Hosea chapter 1 more closely, you'll pick up a nuance that makes this even more astonishing. The way the birth of the 3 children in chapter 1, the 3 children of Hosea and his wife, are recounted, really tells us something about the relationship and her behavior. Because when the chapter tells us about the birth of the first child, Israel, it says she bore him a son. This newly married couple, although she had this unsavory past, nevertheless, she gets pregnant with him and she gives birth to a son. For him, the verse says, which means he was the father. But if you look at the birth of the next two children, you'll find that the author suddenly changes the style. And it says, and she conceived and gave birth to a daughter, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. What's missing from those births were to him, that he had any involvement in those conceptions and in those births. It's not there. So when Lo Ruchama is born, the daughter, and when Lo Ami, the second son, the third child is born, it doesn't say that he had a part of this conception, or that he was the father, or that she gave birth to a son to him, as it says about the birth of the first. So there's an implication here that the second child and the third child may or may not be his. It doesn't say it definitively, but we learn a lot from the style of language of the Torah, especially when it changes, especially when it changes within the same chapter. So if in one verse it says, and she gave birth to a son to him, Hosea, and then the next verse it says, and she gave birth to a son, and it doesn't say, or to a daughter, and it doesn't say that he was part of it, it allows us to question, was there other men involved in her life? Let's remember what her profession was. She was the known prostitute of the area. Did she go back to her lifestyle even while being married to Hosea? We don't know. It doesn't tell us clearly. What is possible is that he himself, the father, Hosea, did not know. He wasn't certain if these are his children or someone else's children. And if they were someone else's children, do they have different fathers, or was it the same other father for child 2 or child 3? Again, we don't know. But the wording leads us to believe that there was doubt, and there was reason for the doubt. What is also interesting is that it is very clear that Hosea himself really loves Gomer. He does love her, even though he's not sure if she has completely changed her lifestyle or not. We find in many of his writings that he writes as a poet about marriage and about love. And he writes about this more than any other prophet. We do have the book Shir Hashirim written by King Solomon. But as far as the prophets are concerned, no one writes about love and marriage as much as Hosea. And he writes it as a man in love, which means as he's writing, he is expressing the love that he has for his wife, even during the years that he was not sure about her behavior. So you can imagine the struggle that Hosea is going through over here, because he's been asked to marry this woman by God. God goes ahead and says, this is the woman you have to marry, a harlot. He actually falls in love with her. He's married to her, yet he himself cannot say with all certainty, I guess this was before they had the ability to take paternity tests or DNA testing. He wasn't sure. He didn't know. Troubling first chapter of the book of Hosea. Confusing first chapter. Again, we get the message that God wants to say. He's giving forth a warning to the people. You're going to be scattered. I'm not going to love you anymore. You're going to not be my nation anymore. But in all the other books of the prophets, God delivers the message directly to the prophet, and the prophet delivers it to the people. Here, it's being given to us in a very strange way with the naming of children and the naming of children of a wife who was by design needed to be a prophet, needed to be a prostitute to marry the prophet. So troubling is this particular chapter of Hosea that some of the classic commentators of Torah, like the Ibn Ezra and Maimonides, when they discuss this chapter, they say that all of this chapter is a dream. Hosea is having a dream, and in this dream, God appears to him. And in this dream, God tells him to marry a prostitute. And in this dream, he marries a prostitute named Gomer. And, in a dream, even a one-night dream can go ahead and span over a decade. In this dream, he has the 3 children. In this dream, the naming of the children takes place. In this dream, God tells him what to name these children and why to name these children. In this dream, he's not certain who the father is. This is all part of a dream. And so Maimonides is from those that say that it's not literal. Don't take it literal. God would not have asked a prophet to marry a prostitute. But there are others that come along and say, no. I'll read to you from Ibn Ezra first. Ibn Ezra says, perish the thought that God would command marrying a woman of harlotry and produce children of harlotry. In my eyes, the truth is that this prophet saw a prophetic vision in a nighttime dream that God told him to take for yourself a woman of harlotry. And he went and took that particular woman, conceived and had children, all part of this prophetic vision. But as I mentioned, there are other commentaries like the Abarbanel and the Malbim, and they come along and they say, not so, not so. If it's written this way, take it literally. And they warn about this, saying, every time you get to an uncomfortable chapter in the Bible, it's such an easy cop-out to say, it's just a vision, it's just a vision. So if you don't really like the story, just turn it into a vision. And they say, you got to be careful with that, because then everyone's going to go ahead and pick any chapter that they have that they don't like and say, it's not real, it didn't really happen, it was just a vision. And they say, if the book of Hosea opens this way, there must have been a story that took place this way. And if it took place this way, you have a right to ask the question, why? But don't dismiss it. Don't say it's not to be taken literal. So following that train of thought, that it indeed is literal, we have to try to understand what's the story all about. What makes it even more confusing is chapter 2 of Hosea. Because chapter 2, you would expect a continuation of the story. And instead, chapter 2 begins to tell us about God's love of Israel. Now, that makes no sense at all. Remember, the children were named about prophecy, that God is upset about how the northern kingdom is behaving. He's upset about their idolatry. He's upset about their immorality. He's upset about their sinful behavior. And he's warning them about what's about to happen, that they will be scattered amongst the world, that he won't love them anymore, and that they won't be his nation anymore. I'm going to read to you words from chapter 2, which comes right after chapter 1. There's not even another chapter in the middle. You go from 1, that strange story and the birth of the children that I told you, to chapter 2. Listen to chapter 2. And the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which shall neither be measured nor counted. And it shall come to pass that instead of saying to them, you are not my people, it should be said to them, you are the children of the living God. In that day, declares the Lord, you will be called my husband. You will no longer call me my master. You're going to say, God is my husband, not my master. And now you have the famous words that some people say when they put on the tefillin in the morning. They will say the words, I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and justice, love and compassion. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you will know God. And I will sow her for me in their land, and I will have compassion upon the unpitied one. And I will say to them that are not my people, you are my people. And they shall say, you are my God. It's completely an opposite turn of chapter 1. It's literally like the author has schizophrenia. In one chapter, scattered, don't love you anymore. You're not my people, you're not my nation. Chapter 2, you're going to be like multiply like the nation, like the sea, the sand on the sea, like the stars in the heaven. And you're not going to be called your master anymore. I'm going to be your husband. That denotes a very loving relationship. And I will betroth you to me forever, on and on. These words of love and these words of the bond is forever. So we're not sure what's going on. It's hard to read a book where you have one chapter one way and the other chapter completely the opposite. It means if you wanted to start a second story that has nothing to do with the first, I understand that in some type of book, you can have one chapter on one subject, one chapter on another subject, and perhaps another chapter that ties the two together. But when you have a second chapter that speaks completely the opposite of chapter 1, you are left totally confused. In the first chapter, he tells the prophet to marry a prostitute and name their children with the most alienating names, signifying the alienation of Israel. And in chapter 2, the very same people are described in the most loving terms with the brightest of futures ahead of them. This is one of the strangest juxtapositions of 2 chapters in the entire Bible. As I'll read you the words from the Sifri, there are portions of Tanakh. Tanakh is the Torah and the books of the prophets that are near each other, but they are distant as the east is from the west. And this is what he describes about these 2 chapters. They're so far apart. And so we have to ask the question, how did Hosea, this book of Hosea, make the sudden switch to speak so highly of the Jewish people after so emphatically denouncing them in the previous chapter? What happened in between? Because clearly something takes place between chapter 1 and chapter 2. And for that, we need to turn to the Talmud. The Talmud in the Tractate of Pesachim helps us with that question. And they give us this extraordinary account of a conversation that takes place between God and Hosea. They give us the unwritten story of the episode that precedes chapter 1 of the book of Hosea. And it is one of the most moving conversations in all of Talmudic literature. And I'll read it to you from the text of the Talmud, but I won't read it to you in Aramaic. I'll give you the translation in English. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Hosea. So this is taking place before the story of chapter 1 that I told you about. So before that takes place, God comes to Hosea and says, your children have sinned. Okay? To this, the prophet should have said, like other prophets, my children, they are your children. What do you mean your children have sinned? I didn't give birth to the Jewish people. They're not, I happen to be born as one of them. What do you mean your people have sinned? Your children have sinned? So he could have said they're your children. And they also, not just your children, they're your favorite children. You made them the chosen people. It's yours. They are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And because of that, please God, be merciful to them, even though they're sinning. You promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that you'll take care of their descendants. Well, these are their descendants. These are their Einiklach. These are their grandchildren. So don't get so angry. Take care of them. That's the way prophets spoke to God. They tried to act as an attorney, as a defense attorney for the Jewish people. We've seen Moses do that many a times, act as a defense attorney. When we get into the portion of Akev, which is where we're up to in Deuteronomy, Moses will recount for the Jewish people, these are the children of those that sinned at the golden calf, and he will tell their children and grandchildren exactly what happened by that sin of the golden calf. It's a very painful episode of the Torah. And Moshe will talk about his defense of the Jewish people, how he tried defending them. He's also going to recount for them the story of the spies. So he talks about the difficult parts of his history as leader of the Jewish people, and he will also talk about how he attempted to defend the Jewish people. So here you have God coming to a prophet saying, your children have sinned. And you would expect him to put on the defense. They're not my children, God. They're your children. They're the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You chose them. You gave them the Torah at Mount Sinai. And true, they have left the path, but have some Rahmanis, and hopefully together we can come up with a plan how to bring them back. But that's not what he says. Listen to what Hosea says, and with that, we'll be able to begin to understand this very strange story. He says, Lord of the universe, the whole world is yours. So exchange them for another nation. Hosea says, trade them in. They're not living up to the plan. Trade them in. You got the whole world to pick from. Pick another nation. You chose them. It didn't work out. Okay. Close the deal. Cancel the deal. The contract is off. Who do you want to pick? Go pick someone else. Now, although it was a simple answer, it was an honest answer. At the same time, it wasn't the answer that you expect to get from a prophet. The prophet has to be one who's trying to help save the people. He's trying to inspire them to repent. And here, he's giving in. He's giving up. What does he say to God? Choose someone else. They're a lost cause. I can't fix them. So go ahead. You got the whole world, God. You're the God of the whole world. The whole world is yours. Exchange them for another nation. Says the Talmud. God says to himself, what should I do with this prophet? That's what he says to me. Trade them in. You think it's easy to just trade them in? Just walk away from them? So this is what God does. He tells him to marry a prostitute and to have children by her. And then after he has children with this prostitute and he loves the woman and he loves the children, even though he doesn't know for certain that he's the father of some of these children, God will then come to him and say, and now leave her. And now leave the family. Divorce the prostitute. Divorce her because you don't even know that she stayed loyal to you. For all you know, she's been sleeping with other men all throughout the years of the marriage. So walk away. Walk away. Can you? Can you just walk away? If you can walk away, then I can walk away. If you can walk away from your relationship with this wife, even though you're uncertain about her behavior, but you love her, you've expressed that love. If you can walk away from these children and just walk out of the house and walk away, then maybe I can walk away from the Jewish people and trade them in as you propose. But if you can't walk away, if you feel love in your heart, even though you question their behavior, then how could you tell me, how could you respond to me that I should walk away from my love, the Jewish people? And so chapter 1 opens that God tells Hosea to go marry a harlot. That comes after Hosea told God, go trade them in. And the prophet listens, and he marries the prostitute, and he gives birth to 3 children. And he doubts, he's not sure of the paternity of all of the children. She remains who she was. The very names of these children can also be demonstrative, not just of the prophecy of what's happening in the rest of the Jewish world at the time, but what's happening in his own heart. When he says, name the child Lo Ruchama, not loved, it's that you're not loved by your own wife, that she's not faithful to you. And then God comes and says, now it's time to leave. And the Talmud tells us that Hosea responds, Sovereign of the universe, I have children by her. I can't expel her. I can't divorce her. There's a love that I feel for her, and there's a love that I feel for the children. Yes, there was betrayal. And yes, there was disappointment. But there's something in my heart that says, I love her. and she's my wife, and we're connected. So please, God, don't ask me to divorce her. Imagine this. God asks a prophet to do something, gives a logical explanation why he should do it, and he says, I can't do it. And then the Talmud says the following. Said the Holy One, blessed be he to him. Then if you, whose wife is a harlot, and your children are the children of harlotry, and you don't know whether they are yours or they belong to others, and yet you're committed to her, then the Jewish people who are my children, the children of my beloved ones, the children of Abraham, the children of Isaac, the children of Jacob, of my four most precious acquisitions in the world, which were Torah and Israel and heaven and earth and the holy temple. These are the children devoted to that, given the mission for that. And yet you say, exchange them for a different people. And it's at that moment that Hosea gets it. He understands what this was all about. God showed him in his own life how, caught between anger and tender longing, he found that he could not relinquish his love for her. And God leads him to understand through his own personal experiences that mirrors the relationship between God and Israel, God and the Jewish people. That God rescued them from slavery, and he led them through a wilderness, and he brought them to a new home, the land of Israel. But the people, they weren't so faithful, they weren't so loyal, and they worshiped other gods, and they were promiscuous in their spiritual attachments. By right, says God, I should have abandoned them. I should have called them by that name, Lo Ami, you are not my people. Lo Recham, I don't love you anymore. I'm going to scatter you amongst all the other nations. Yet God says, my love is inextinguishable. And just like you can't let go, I can't let go. Whatever the people's sins may be, they will come back. They will be loyal again. I will feel the love that we had at that marriage at Mount Sinai. The marriage will be renewed. And it is at this moment that Hosea's mouth now produces some of the most beautiful poetry about our people ever recorded. Those were the lines that I read to you from chapter 2. So chapter 2 is Hosea's response to this whole story of this love that God has for the Jewish people that is eternal, that even when we are distant from him, God says, I still love them. And using the terminology, I am not your master, I am your husband. We're in this very deep, loving relationship. And I will gather you from all the corners of the world, and the land of Israel will be yours eternally. And I will be betrothed to you forever and ever. And the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which shall neither be measured nor counted. In that day, Hosea writes, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master, because we will be betrothed forever in righteousness, in justice, in love, and in compassion. The message is very, very clear from these two chapters. Who is a leader of the Jewish people? What is a leader of the Jewish people? Only one who loves his people. You can't be a leader of a people and not like them. You can question their behavior. You could not like their behavior, but you can't hate them and lead them. That doesn't work. You know, it's easy to see the prophets as social critics. They're always looking to criticize. You're not doing this right. You're not doing this right. And that's part of their job. They see people's faults and they have to call them on it. They have to speak about it out loud. And their message can come across as strong because they're also foretelling disaster. In their prophecy, they're saying what could happen. But the Talmud is telling us if you only see that, then you're missing the essential point. And the essential point is that the prophet loved the people. He loved all of the nation of Israel. He loved the people that he was prophesying to, even when he was prophesying destruction, because he was trying to inspire them and influence them to change their ways. They didn't speak in these terms because they were condemning the people. They were condemning the sin. And from the depth of their heart and soul, and from the deep desire to bring them back into a loving relationship with God, they pointed out the sins of man, the sins of the Jewish people, because they knew what Israel was capable of. They knew that we can always get better, and that we can be summoned to great things, that we can fulfill the mission that God gave us. They knew this. They believed in us. They didn't criticize us to distance themselves from us, to set themselves apart and above all of us. They spoke in love, God's love, the love that God has for the Jewish people. They expressed those terms. And this was the message that God was explaining to Hosea, that even when you're with someone that is not necessarily going in your ways, you can still love them. And I still love the Jewish people. Because you can't lead, and you can't educate, and you can't challenge, and you can't criticize the Jewish people if you don't love them with all of your heart and all of your soul. Then it's just words of condemnation. Then it's words of hate. But if you truly love, and you show that love, then you could lead. Then you can educate. Then you can challenge. And then you can even criticize. You try that with your own family, try that with your children, you try that with your spouse. If it comes words from the heart, you can say a lot, and you can teach a lot, and you can inspire a lot. But if it's coming from anger and hate, you won't get anywhere. You'll just chase them away. Some of our finest and holiest Jews, with all of their zealousness, miss the most essential quality of the bond between God and his people. And that is unconditional love. That God loves each and every one of us, and we must love each and every single Jew because God does. There are moments when our relationship reaches a low point. There are moments that we face terrible consequences, exile, but never was the love put into question. Being Jewish is not just a commitment to abide by a set of rules. The relationship of a Jew is with his creator. It's not an employer-employee relationship. You're not chosen to do a job, and if you don't do a job, you're fired, and I'm trading you in for someone else. Being chosen, and listen to these words, is an irreversible state of being. It's your essence, an irreversible state of being. It's who you are. You can't quit it. You can't turn it away. You can't chase it away. You can't sell it. You can't exchange it. It's who you are. It runs to the core of our very being and can never be revoked, not by us and not by God. A father can't just terminate the relationship with his son. He may think he can. They can be estranged. They cannot talk to one another. They can be angry at one another. They cannot live together. But a father will always be the father of the child, and the child will always be the child of the father. You can't change a fact. God could never trade us in for another nation, as Hosea originally proposed. And that is precisely what Hosea discovers in chapter 1 and in chapter 2. Yes, his wife was not loyal to him and caused him, I am sure, deep emotional pain. But when push came to shove and God asked him to get up and leave her, he couldn't do it because she was still his wife and he still loved her. And he discovered that his bond with her was very, very deep. It was even deeper and more profound than his pain. That the love that he had transcended everything else and that he would find a way to make this work. And the whole of their marriage was worth far more than the sum of its parts. It wasn't just built on logic. There was something deeper there. Their marriage, as Hosea says, was undeniable. And after this realization, his perspective on the Jewish people would change dramatically. And he became aware of their indomitable state of their soul. Nothing can tie down the essential identity of the Jew and his or her relationship with God. The story has a happy ending. It didn't just end with the birth of these 3 children and the estrangement of this family. The Torah tells us, the book of Hosea tells us, that the names of the children changed. And by telling us the meaning of the names of the children that changed, rather than Israel meaning dispersed, it means planted. So the first child's name suddenly meant they will be planted. What does that mean? That even if they go into exile, they will forever be connected to this land. If you're planted, the roots will always be. And at some point, the tree will grow again. At some point, the Jewish people will be back in the land of Israel. The name of the child that was called no love, it was called unpitied. There too, the name changes its meaning, and suddenly it means loved. And God says, your child that's called Lo Ami, not my nation, change it to mean Ami, my nation. That the relationship now changes with Hosea and his 3 children, change with the relationship of him and his wife as they come together closer as a family. So too, the prophet tells us that the relationship with the Jewish people and God come back together whole and deep, and we would see it in a very revealed manner. The discussion that I just had with you on this particular first 2 chapters of Hosea is something that the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke about, and it came in response to a crisis that was taking place in Israel years ago. I won't get into the details of it because it was rather painful. But there was a rabbi in Israel that publicly made a statement. And this statement disturbed the Lubavitcher Rebbe so much that where he always had a policy of never criticizing any other rabbi, even another human being, but it would always find a way to inspire and to teach, he made an exception here to actually criticize the words of this rabbi. And in that criticism, he spoke about these first 2 chapters of Hosea. What that particular rabbi had said was that the Jews in Israel are made up of a bunch of pork eaters and therefore deserve a second Holocaust. And the Rebbe was so offended by these remarks to call Jewish people pork eaters and to say that we deserve another Holocaust, that the Rebbe said that what was lacking here was a complete understanding of the relationship between God and the Jewish people. It's deeper than do you keep kosher or not. Of course, keeping kosher is part of our people and part of our Torah and part of our mitzvot, but it doesn't define the relationship. It's deeper than that. And no, we don't deserve another Holocaust. We never deserved the first Holocaust. We never deserved any persecution. If anything, we deserve God's reward, God's embrace for living as Jews the best way we possibly could, all through thousands of years of difficult times. And so that the Rebbe believed that the times for Mashiach is so close because of God's love for us and for the tremendous accomplishments that we have as being his chosen people. And with this, the Rebbe pointed out from these 2 chapters of Hosea, whereas originally Hosea said, trade them in, but then God shared with him through his own personal experiences the depth of his love that he has for the Jewish people, for his chosen people. And we'll stop at this point. I do want to tell all of you out there, those of you that have children and grandchildren, we're starting 2 new youth programs. One starts this evening at 5:30, and that's going to be a weekly story time. And the story will be told by my daughter-in-law, Adele Bryski. It's available on Zoom for all children. You can tell your children, your grandchildren about it. We sent out an email just before with the link. And then on Fridays at 2 o'clock, our Chana Aaron and my granddaughter Chaya Labor will be holding a junior congregation Again, for all children, every Friday at 2 o'clock. So you have every Wednesday at 5:30, story time, and you have every Friday at 2 o'clock, junior congregation for the children. That's just 2 new programs that we're adding to our long list of weekly programs that we're offering now on Zoom. I want to wish everyone a very safe week, a healthy week, a good week. I look forward to seeing you hopefully soon in person. Take care, everyone.